In this video, let's actually calculate diluted shares outstanding correctly. Recall that in the prior video, we just sort of hard-coded 145.9. That was the right answer, but let's actually get to it scientifically the way you actually would. So we're going to delete this. You don't have any data yet now. And now we're going to go into the shares tab, and we're going to calculate, we're going to go through the diluted shares calculation. For those of you who've gone through any of our other courses, whether it's DCF or comps or M&A, you've done this before, so we're going to go through this at a fairly fast clip. So the first thing we know that in order to calculate diluted shares, we want to start with the basic share count and add any potentially dilutive securities. So in this tab, we laid all that out. So the basic share count for any company, the latest actual share count, can be found on the front cover of their latest financial filing. That's a given. So as we know with BMC, the latest filing was actually exactly on the day that the LBO was announced. So as of May 6, 2013, the 10K came out. There's 143 million shares outstanding. And so this is the number that we're going to put in here. We want this in millions. We're going to do that. And the potentially dilutive securities for most companies, you want to start by making sure that there's no options or what the options are, if there are any convertible securities or any restricted stock that you need to consider. So let's start with the first, which is options. So options are identified in the 10K in a schedule typically. And as I talked about in other courses, the easiest way to find that is to just type in the word exercisable. When you hear the term exercisable, you're usually referring to some sort of option agreement. So this isn't quite what we're looking for here, shareholder rights agreement. I'm looking for a table that identifies all the exercisable options. Let's see if I get there. And here we are. So just scrolling up to kind of see where this is, buried. So this is buried usually in the stock-based compensation footnote. I'm just kind of scrolling up to see if that's the case here. Sure. Footnote 9, share-based compensation. If you scroll down a couple of pages back to where we were, you see that you have the stock option breakout. So two things to note here. They have 3.3 million vested and exercisable options as of March 31st, 2013. And notice that they also happen to have 3.3 million outstanding options. It means that all of their outstanding options happen to be vested and exercisable. Now, we're doing this in the context of a transaction, so we're trying to understand what would happen if an LBO actually took place for BMC, and when an LBO or an acquisition takes place, all exercisable options typically auto-vest. Now, that's not always the case, but typically that happens. That's part of a typical sort of option contract provision. So in this case, it's kind of a moot point because all of their options are already vested and exercisable. But certainly if there was a difference, we would take the outstanding batch as opposed to just the vested and exercisable. And that's a distinct approach from what you would do if you were looking at a standalone valuation or anything like that, where you don't assume some acquisition that would trigger the auto vest. So we have 3.3 million. Now we're going to put a pin in this for a second. We're going to look at restricted stock as well, but just keep in mind that we're going to have to revisit this to see if there's a disclosure, maybe a more detailed disclosure that breaks out this 3.3 million on a tranche by tranche basis, which is going to let us be a little bit more precise about whether we include perhaps some out of the money portions of this 3.3 million in the share count. So for now, we know we've got 3.3 million options outstanding that we're going to sort of consider with an average exercise price of $31. We're going to look for a more detailed disclosure in a second. But now let's also talk about the restricted stock. So usually directly below, directly above the stock options disclosures, you have restricted stock awards as well. That's sort of the other common, as we've talked about, form of share-based compensation. And BMC is no different, as is increasingly the case for a lot of companies. Restricted stock is becoming the favored or the more common way to incentivize employees over stock options, and that's the case here. The company has 7.4 million outstanding non-vested stock units. They're not using the exact word restricted stock, they're calling it non-vested stock units. 7.4 million outstanding during the period. And just to remind you how restricted stock is a little bit different from stock options, these are actual shares that the employee will receive upon sort of vesting. So there's no exercise price, there's no proceeds for the employee to pay the company. It's just you had at the beginning of the year 7.4 million options restricted units outstanding. 4.2 million new ones were granted during the period. 3.3 were vested and became common stock, sort of came into the basic share count. And 0.9 million were canceled. Presumably they either expired, the employee left, what have you. So that currently there's 7.4 million outstanding. And just like with the approach with stock options, because the context here is an LBO, because we're assuming that BMC is going to get bought out, the BMC shareholders are going to get bought out, although this is not always the case, but the best practice for making a deal assumption when you're modeling is that the restricted stock will automatically vest as well as part of the deal. That's not always the case, but that doesn't happen. That does happen more often than not, that the vesting restrictions that employees have on their restricted stock either get amended or go away entirely. So 7.4 million outstanding. So both of these together add up to about 10.7, 3.3 plus 7.4, 10.7 million potentially dilutive shares. Of course, the one thing we now need to go and look at is, well, there are going to be some option proceeds coming here, and using the treasury stock method, the net dilutive impact of this might be a lot less than 3.3. So let's look at those disclosures. Let's see if we can kind of scroll down and find those, and here they are. So directly below restricted stock and options disclosures, now you've got a detailed options table that breaks down all 3.3 million options that are exercisable and outstanding, in fact, by corresponding exercise prices. So here you see that. So now we have everything that we need in order to complete our schedule for BMC, our diluted share count calculation for BMC. And in fact, let's just double check that there are no convertible securities, because that's the other thing you kind of want to check for. That's another potentially dilutive securities, but as we'll see in a second, BMC does not happen to have any, so there aren't convertible security issues to think through here. Okay, so it's finished searching the document. We feel good enough. There are no convertible securities outstanding to wrestle with. At this point, we're going to switch into the Excel model and finalize this share schedule. Okay, so let's incorporate all the things that we've been looking at now into Excel. So we're going to put in all the tranche by tranche option data first. We've got the latest basic share count here, so we just want to get all these dilutive securities. So we're just going to go in here and put that in. So these are the corresponding exercise prices. Might actually just be better off typing this in. All right, so now I have to figure out whether, and let's just confirm this is that 3.3 million. We've got them all in there. And now let's just make sure that these shares are, let's just test whether each batch is in the money or not. So we're going to do that by looking at if, all right, let's start a little more logically. If this exercise price is less than the offer price, and we're going to anchor that because we're going to copy and paste that down, that means that these outstanding shares are considered in the money. We're going to add them into the dilutive share count. Otherwise, we're not going to include them. We want to make sure we fill it all the way down. Just put that border back on, and let's sum up all of this. So here, since the exercise prices are all less than the offer price, everything is in the money. So in the money exercisable options, we just reference from here. Total proceeds, this is going to be a sum product function because every one of these batches is in the money, so we want to take sum product. And it's very important that we actually take this column and the second column, rather than column C, we take the column that's already been tested whether they're in the money or not. And that gives us the total proceeds, which is going to be $100 million. If we're going to pretend, or we're going to assume like all of these options are going to be exercised, then let's assume that the company will obviously also get the proceeds associated with it. Well, how many shares can be repurchased at $46 a share with $100 million? 2.2, so that the net dilutive impact is not 3.3, which is the gross dilution, but rather 1.1 million. Now, other securities we've already identified, if you scroll back up here, that the restricted stock, there's about 7.4 million outstanding restricted shares, so let's put that in. And so our net diluted shares outstanding is the basic share count plus the net dilution from options plus the restricted stock. All right, now guys, the one final thing that I want to mention is in subsequent videos, you're going to see we goofed. We inadvertently, when we were making this course, we actually put the 7.4 restricted stock and it weighted the grant day price here. We actually mistook this to be an options tranche, and as opposed to a restricted stock tranche, because it was called non-vested, and we just sort of goofed. So we ended up putting this in here. So if you go subsequently through the course, you're going to see diluted shares outstanding being pulled into the course of 145.8. It sort of permeates through every single video. So the one thing that I want to do, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the numbers, but it's going to make the numbers throughout if you do it the right way, the way we just talked about, where you put in 7.4 in here as restricted stock. The numbers are going to be a little bit off from all the other videos. So I think for the sake of reducing confusion, what I'd like you to do when you go into your own models right now is put in 7.4 restricted stock in here, sort of, and the quote unquote exercise price of 42 from here. Don't put in the restricted stock here where it actually should be. And then towards the end of the course, we're going to catch it in the videos and we're going to put it in the right way. So just a goof on our part, but to prevent you guys from being confused throughout the course with your numbers not matching, put in the restricted stock within the options tranche with a corresponding exercise price, quote unquote, of $42. So this is what I actually want you to put into your models. Just keep in the back of your minds that this is actually restricted stock, and we're going to fix that towards the end of the video. So just bear with us. This is what you want to put in your models right now.